Hi, everyone. I lead product and advisory at Section. We're going to zoom way in these 10-minute sessions and really focus on what we have seen as we've been spending the last 18 to 24 months with companies and really with AI executives to help them figure out how to overcome the barriers that they see to getting value from AI. So we work with tons of companies that have found significant ROI. We are talking to and working with many who haven't yet. And so across these hundreds of organizations, we really see about 10 to 15 distinct barriers that limit a company from getting ROI from AI. I've chosen today to focus on four, and these four are the earliest, I would say, and the most common that we see. Think about them as when they exist, they stall AI ROI out right away. And if you don't solve for these, you've got many more hurdles ahead. You've got to at least solve for these first. So let's dig in. The first barrier we're going to talk about today is your company or organization lacks a why of AI. This is a pretty typical company we work with, I would say, especially when we get in and start working with these organizations. So more than 75% of employees in this specific company say there isn't a formal AI strategy yet. And this data is from a company that's a little bit further on the kind of adoption, or I should say, deployment curve than you might think, right? They've already rolled out actually 2 or 3 different LLMs to their workforce. Their workforce is relatively technologically savvy. They're a pretty they're in financial services, so they're a pretty knowledge worker forward workforce. And even in this company, only 23% of the employees say that the company has a formal AI strategy. This is really, really, really common. Often when we come into an organization, business leaders feel like, of course, there's a strategy driving workforce AI use, right? But the employees say they have no idea. And when you dig deeper, strategy can mean many different things. So we're going to talk about one in particular today, which is we start to hear comments like this. And I've heard comments like this. I'm sure others of you have heard comments like this, right? We shouldn't be using AI just for the sake of using it. And of course we shouldn't, right? As a leader, it can be, frankly, I think frustrating to hear this, especially when you're moving really fast and you're like, yes, like we're kind of past this point though, right? Like we believe winning companies will leverage AI. We know we have to maintain a competitive edge. Sometimes our board, our investors, our CEO is asking us why we aren't AI powered yesterday. So spending time articulating this can, feel like a distraction. But it's not. I think like what we see in the companies that have been most successful is that they have been able to articulate very clearly and consistently a why of AI. They have helped employees understand first and then feel very bought into why you're expecting them to use AI. It's one of the most consistent things we see. It's not, incredibly sexy, but it's what's actually, the baseline, the foundation for organizations where they're actually reporting significant ROI gains. That's because it's really hard. We've been talking about this already today, right? It's really hard to get employees to actually use AI. Yes, you're going to have 10, maybe if you're lucky, 15% of your workforce is those early adopters that are going to figure it out themselves. But the rest hate change. And AI is a really, really big change. The other thing that we see is AI is emotional, right? I was just talking about this with the head of AI yesterday. It's not like rolling out some, new software that you've rolled out in the past, right? People are emotional when they talk about talk about AI. We see it in the chat today, right? People are thinking about how does it impact their creativity? How does it impact their job security? What does it mean if AI is great at something you've thought your whole life you were great at? And that is literally what's happening, right? And so when that's happening, employees need to not just, again, understand why that change is coming and why it's being expected of them, but feel bought into that. Like, why is it good for the organization? If they don't, they will fill in their own blanks. And that's where you get those types of comments that we saw in those previous slides, which are real interview comments and real survey responses that we see over and over again inside of these organizations. So you have to reframe AI as the means, not the ends. Your why of AI has to ground employees in the idea that AI is imperative to the business. So this can mean AI is imperative to survival of the business. If you're in an industry that's been turned upside down by AI, it can mean it's imperative to beating your competitors. It can mean AI is imperative to delivering on the promises you've made to customers. For many organizations, it's probably all of the above, right? But companies that have, again, driven significant adoption and are reporting significant real use cases that they feel like are generating measurable ROI, they have done this. They have convinced employees kind of at scale that AI is imperative to the core mission of their business, which is frankly the reason many of your employees, right, are there, either because they value the mission or because they think the business is going to generate money for them because it delivers on something for their customers. So you have to tie AI to that rather than make it this thing that you're asking everyone to do just because you believe that we should now be using AI. At Section, we call this an AI manifesto. It's a living, breathing document, constantly updated, right? It can't be out of date, when a new employee joins, when someone goes back and refers to it. And it has to convey, again, that why of AI, the imperative or the mission critical reason you need to integrate AI into every part of your business. And the best companies that I see, they reference this over and over again. When we talk to their employees, 9 out of 10 employees are referencing that same why, right? There's not this kind of sense of if you talk to 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. That's really the foundational base layer that we see. And in organizations where we've seen adoption stall out, this is often the challenge, is that AI has been positioned as the ends rather than the means to the ends. The last thing I want to say around this is your why of AI can't be, we want to be more efficient. It might be the CFO's real why, right? It might even be one of the company's real whys. It honestly is, right, for many of our organizations, but it can't be the central one because you can't rally your employees around this to really drive the usage and the experimentation you need. It introduces too many questions, right, around job security and who benefits from that efficiency. So that doesn't mean you don't talk about this. Like, we're not saying, don't talk about the fact that part of the, reality here is you are usually looking for efficiency, as Greg talked about, right? We usually start with cut and then we move to create. But when you think about this manifesto, this kind of central why of AI that you are rallying the organization around, and frankly, mandating the organization around, it has to be tied more to, again, what the organization is designed to do in the first place. And most organizations weren't built to create efficiencies. So I'm going to wrap here with just a couple of examples. Duolingo is one of my favorites. Duolingo got a lot of pushback for publishing this memo, as frankly, many organizations have who have gone out and published memos, and we can talk about that at a different point. But when I look at this, to be honest, I see a very strong, explicit why of AI, right? Their mission is to teach customers new languages. And to do that, they need massive amounts of content. And that's been really hard in their business, you can assume from this. I would agree. We're in a section that produces a lot of content as well. And therefore, to fulfill on that imperative, which is to create content that teaches millions and millions of customers, that's their why of AI. Making that process better for their customers, making that process, better for their employees so that they can do things that they've never been able to do, which they reference here. It's easy to point to tech companies, right? And obviously there are fewer organizations that have published these kind of manifestos publicly, but we talk to many organizations. These are others that I have seen. They all, again, tie back to the reason that the company exists and how they will better deliver the thing that they are trying to deliver on, how they will better serve their customers across healthcare, across client services, across retail, across consumer goods. There's examples in every single industry that we work with. The last thing I'd say is this isn't it. I don't want to imply this is, easy. This can be something that can take time, right? Especially in large organizations. It can take a month or two to get everyone aligned. You have to get all your executives aligned to one clear, simple message. Sometimes that's not always the fastest thing. It also requires equipping all of your frontline managers to be hammering home that same message, right? It can't be just the CEO off over here. That definitely does not work when we're inside of these organizations, right? It has to be coming from everyone, but in the companies we've seen that are, telling us about significant ROI they're finding, and some of them are talking today, they've all done this. This is where they've started. Okay, guys, just if you weren't on the last one, really quickly, I lead product and advisory at Section. I'm sharing four of about 10 or 15 consistent barriers to ROI we see based on our work with hundreds of companies. And the four that we're focused on today are the most common. I think of them as if you don't have these, you're going to kind of adoption, and then frankly, ROI is going to stall out right away. So the first we covered was you need a why of AI. The second barrier I'm going to talk about is access, maybe even less sexier than the why of AI. And when we talk to most executives, especially, the first time that I meet them, they're usually quick to dismiss this. They say something like, yeah, we've chosen Copilot, or we've chosen GPT, we've given the team access, let's dig into the next thing. But when we dig in to, talking to employees, talking to organizations, that's really not the whole story. I think that access still is a real barrier to getting ROI. So I want to kind of show you why. So, and let's get rid of our black boxes here. It sounds obvious, right? You can't get ROI from your AI investments if your employees don't have access to that investment. But there's nuance there. How many employees, who has access? And so most organizations have reported that they've already done this, right? 80% of executives are reporting that they've piloted or deployed an enterprise LLM. But employees are saying something different. So in our benchmarking, we ask knowledge workers across the US, across Canada, across Europe, and we ask them about what's limiting your use to AI, what's hindering your, if you're not using AI or you're not using it as frequently as we might like, what's stopping you? And we also ask them, do you actually have access to an LLM? And only a third of employees that work at organizations that approve of AI have made an LLM available to them. So I just want to kind of say that again. This is specifically looking at employees who say their organization approves of AI. So we've thrown out anyone who said their employer discourages AI or is silent on AI even, right? We're looking only at employees who say their company actually has vocally approved of AI. And even in those companies, only a third of employees say they have access to a company-sponsored LLM. So that's a lack of access, right? There's still a barrier there for people to be getting access and getting value, therefore, out of these platforms. We see it all the time when we're in companies. And these are just some quotes from, honestly, people we've talked to in the last month. Rollouts have been super, super messy, right? So often a few people were granted access to a GPT Teams account, and then more people heard about it and they asked for access. And then it snowballs, and suddenly no one knows exactly who has access to what tools or why what defines that group of people who has access to those tools. Sometimes a platform gets rolled out, even to a small team, and then everybody gets a little spooked, right? And it gets pulled back, it gets taken away, or it gets hindered or hampered in terms of the capabilities that are turned on. Very often it's opt-in versus opt-out, right? We'll give you access if you ask, but then no one knows that they should ask. It's hard to ask, right? These things kind of get slowed down, especially inside of larger organizations. Sometimes, like Alicia talked about in our first session, employees just don't even know where the platform is. Like you feel like you've rolled it out, and then we go in and we talk to employees, and they don't even know that GPT or Copilot or Gemini is available, or a specific marketing tool, right? Or a specific tool for your engineers. So there's a ton here, right? There are cost implications. There are security implications. I'm not saying it's easy to get everyone access to a really strong AI platform, but I am saying that if you want to create an AI-powered workforce that's finding real high-value use cases every day, you need nearly every knowledge worker using AI all the time, at least weekly from our perspective. That's how they find opportunities to use AI themselves, and then how they find opportunities where you can embed AI in critical workflows. And they can't do that if they don't have access. So two common versions of these challenges, and then I'll share a little bit about the challenges we see within each of these two scenarios. So the first is You've rolled out AI to everyone, but it's a hamstrung version of AI. You haven't included the best model or the best capabilities. Emily talked about this a little bit, right? When she kind of challenged Greg and said, well, are they not using it because they don't have access to the best possible models? Usually this is because in the IT or the procurement process, right, it got whittled down. The platform got whittled down to exclude some of the those powerful capabilities. One of the most common examples I see of this is an organization rolls out GPT and they don't turn on custom GPTs. When I tell execs who we work with who have found significant ROI from their investments, they're kind of shocked by that. They're like, what do you mean they haven't turned on custom GPTs? Because they've realized that by turning on these advanced capabilities, that empowers the employees to really understand better what are the ways that I could actually use AI, right? But again, when we are really, thinking about this from a security perspective and from a cost perspective, which again it's not like those are unfounded things to be thinking about, but that's where suddenly we've whittled down the platform to a much more basic, much less sophisticated version that employees have access to, and then therefore you actually have an access problem. The second scenario that's super common is it's been rolled out to a pocket of the organization, either a team, a level, or a function. This sounds great in theory, and it is to a certain extent, right? If you can have a fast, kind of violent pilot where you actually move through that pilot quickly. But in a second, I'll talk about what we see when you let that kind of linger. In companies that roll out a hamstrung version of AI, there are two things that happen. Beginners assume that it doesn't work well, right? They have a confirmation bias. Often they want to believe AI isn't as powerful as other people say it is. It's emotional, right? Or they just don't get it. It's a platform, it's a technology that none of us have been used to, right? We're used to technology where when we go into a platform and we say 2 + 2 = X, it gives us 4 every single time. AI doesn't work like that. So when you hamstring the platform and you roll out either a model that's out of date or again, AI with less of the advanced capabilities, and beginners go in and experience AI, they don't see kind of the full potential of the solution. The second thing that we see is that your advanced users, they just get frustrated, right? They know how many of us have personal accounts, even if our company hasn't rolled out full, GPT-5 or custom GPTs or things like that, right? They know that these things exist. They're using them probably in their personal life. And so your shadow AI rates go through the roof. All of this is going to limit your ROI and frankly limit your safe and effective ROI use, use that drives ROI, right? If the very thing you're trying to stop, which is employees using some of these more advanced capabilities, might just happen off platform. We also work with lots of companies who want to pilot. And like I said, I think pilots can work if they are executed quickly in honestly kind of a month or two, right? In terms of, and also if they're executed through the lens of what are you actually trying to accomplish with the pilot, right? Like, what are you trying to prove? And we could talk more about that at a later date. What we do see though, is if these pilots linger longer than like 2 or 3, I would say even like 1 to 2 months, two things happen. Novices and beginners, they get anxious, right? They hear about AI use, but they're not experiencing it themselves. And they start to wonder more about their job, about the quality of work that comes out of AI, what's happening over there in marketing where they're using Copilot. Oh, they must be, generating a ton of marketing slop like we were just talking about. Right. And they become more resistant usually. And then you have the same thing happen as it happens in the first scenario for your advanced users. They get frustrated if they don't have access, and they often go underground, right? And again, you see shadow AI use go through the roof. So from our perspective, if you're going to invest in an LLM, you have to go all in to get real transformative ROI. That's what we've seen with our clients. That's what we've seen with ourselves. So your mandate is you can't kind of have half measures, right? You have to commit and get every knowledge worker access to an enterprise LLM. It has to come with coaching and, upskilling that's been talked a little bit about today. And you have to turn on the most advanced capabilities you can. And then the last piece, and a couple people have talked about this, Lee was just talking about it a bit. I think it was talked about in the first section. You also need a fast, efficient approval process to allow functional teams to pilot tools that cater to their specific goals. One of the most common things we hear when we go into an organization is a ton of frustration around the fact that it takes 6 to 9 months to get approval to test something out on the marketing team that's a marketing specific platform. I'm not like that's hard, right? Like in a big organization, yes, especially if you're handling a lot of, if you're in a highly regulated industry, but 6 to 9 months just doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work at the rate of change that these platforms are changing. So, you know, again, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today sounds easy on paper. When we jump in and get into organizations, even if you don't think you have an access problem, a lot of organizations still do. Even the most advanced organizations we work with are constantly thinking about these challenges. But they have figured some of this out, right? We work with executives in highly regulated industries that have built new solutions and new processes, and they've brought IT and finance and HR and other parts of the org along. But consistently across all those advanced organizations we work with, they have done these three things. They've gotten the most advanced capabilities of AI into the hands of almost every knowledge worker in the organization. I've introed the last two by saying they're not the sexiest, and this is no exception. This is probably the least sexy of all three, but we'll get a little more exciting at the end maybe. But it really is around governance. So our first was the company doesn't have a clear why of AI. Leo just talked about that, which was awesome. Our second is you haven't really achieved true access, and the third is really around governance and around your AI policy. I think most people think of their AI policy, if they're thinking of it, as solving a compliance problem, right? Making sure that employees are using AI safely. I think about it as it's also solving an adoption problem. It's helping employees feel more confident that they can actually use AI and experiment with it. So again, this is a pretty typical company that we work with. When we ask employees about their organization's AI governance policy, what we often see is about 75% of employees say, honestly, largely that they don't know. They have no idea. Some say there isn't one, but usually the biggest swath when we go in and start working with a company is they say, is that I'm not sure bucket. And this is a really big problem because it impedes, again, adoption of the platforms that you're rolling out. And it impedes, as we'll see in a moment, the sophistication of the use of those platforms. So again, I really think about the policy less as solving a compliance problem. Of course, it does that. That's a no-brainer. But also, it has to be designed to solve this adoption problem. Across all our benchmarking, when we ask employees what limits their AI usage, this is the number one reason. The number one reason they cite, it's cited by over 2/3 of knowledge workers, is that they are concerned about data privacy or security. That's like a little crazy, right? If you think about it. When we ask people again, what's limiting their use, it's more common for them to say they're worried about data security or privacy than concerns about the tool working, right? This is more common, a more common limitation cited than hallucinations. It's more common than their concerns about job loss. It's more common than not knowing how to use AI well or not knowing what to use AI for. Those are all real problems. But this is the one that when you ask employees what's limiting their use, this is the top concern. So no clear usage policy isn't just a compliance issue. It is actually an adoption issue, which is therefore an ROI issue, which we'll talk about in a moment. I just want to give you a little bit more of a sense. I feel like these kind of quotes help bring to life a bit more about what's happening in the employee's head, right? Like why they feel this way. So you have some employees just straight up saying they don't use AI because they don't know what the company policy is. And that's probably your kind of earliest, going to be what's happening in your earliest companies in terms of kind of where they're at on the AI maturity curve. You also have employees saying they use it sometimes, but less frequently than they would because they're concerned about privacy or security. And then you even have employees saying they use it for certain tasks, maybe basic tasks. And remember, Greg showed that slide very, very early on in our day, showing that about 90% of employees are still in that very basic use case kind of bucket. A lot of that is because they're nervous about using AI for a more sophisticated idea that they might have because again they don't have clarity from their company on what are the guardrails with which they should be using AI. By the way, in the vast majority of companies that we work with, that where again, if I go back to this slide, right, where you've had this big swath of I'm not sure, most of them have a policy. So it's not a problem that they haven't written something up. It's either a problem that the policy is too vague or it hasn't been kind of communicated to employees in a way that they will actually understand it. Because often, as we all know, these policies are vague, they're jargony, they were written by people who have now gone through, 10, 15 edits, and it's hard to understand how I actually should use this as, a standard marketer inside the organization, looking for inspiration. So I want to just talk a bit for a second around why this is an issue, because I think there's sometimes this reaction, especially inside very large corporations, around, well, we get it, but it would be worse if everyone was using AI not safely than having them not use it at all. And I think that the reason that that's the wrong way to think about it is because AI right now is like a sandbox. To find real high value use cases, some of the ones that Leah was talking about, you need your employees to be playing with AI, to be experimenting with AI. It's a totally new technology, right? That behaves totally differently. And your employees are your subject matter experts on how your business works. They know how the process actually gets done, right? How the marketing team creates their deliverables and, runs their marketing tests. They're the subject matter experts on how your organization works. And you need your subject matter experts in a safe sandbox, right? Experimenting with how AI can improve their work first and then therefore the business's work. But if they don't feel safe to do that, if they don't feel protected to do that, then as we can see on the previous kind of data I showed you, right, they won't. And so then your ROI is limited. So this is the impact. This is what we see in companies where there aren't very clear usage guidelines. We see a couple things. We see much less experimentation happening, or we hear a lot about siloed or even silent experimentation, right? People aren't talking about using AI. They might have found what they think is maybe a great use case, but they're nervous to share it because they know it requires uploading their marketing plan, and they're not totally sure if that's what's allowed. And I think Leo just referenced some of this as well. In these organizations that don't have a clear kind of guardrails for employees, we also see a much higher prevalence. I talked about this a little bit before, of those beginner level use cases versus your more advanced use cases. And I think worse, we also just see, again, it comes through a lot when we go in and talk to employees. The way they're talking about using AI is more like a secret. It's more like, there's a concern around fear around, like, well, I don't want to get in trouble for using AI. So either I'm not going to talk about it, or worst case, I'm not, again, testing some of the ideas that I might have based on my own workflows and what I know my challenges are for how AI could help me. So again, you're significantly hampering experimentation by the exact people who are the experts on your business. And everyone here on this call today is asking about, like, where are the examples of where there's $100,000 or $1 million kind of ROI coming from AI. Those examples exist for sure, and a couple people have shared about them, and we'll get to a couple more. But they're coming actually from employees often, right? They're coming from the people in the organization who are doing this work. And so, again, in the organizations we see where that's successful, they have a very clear, specific set of guardrails. So that's how I think about what the mandate is for AI leaders, right? You need to publish and be talking about it all the time. I love what Alicia was sharing around, like, right, she's talking about putting things on the video screens in your office and putting up flyers. Again, this is not, as I said earlier, like the super exciting stuff, but it is the stuff that works. You have to have a clear, simple, specific guardrails. They have to be easy to find for employees. They have to be specific, as I said, right? Don't upload sensitive information. That's not helpful enough, right? It has to be, I don't know what sensitive information is. We at least have to have some examples for employees. Otherwise, again, you're going to limit adoption. And lastly, I think one of the things that I've seen in a couple of organizations that I think is just a really great way to think about it is also sharing more of the why, right? And trusting the employee to understand and want to understand, right? Like, why are what are the scenarios in which I should be using an LLM or an AI platform, especially one that's an enterprise solution, right? Something that you've rolled out and kind of stamped as an approved platform. Because there are, of course, situations where we want to use those sensitively. But it's just explaining the why, right? The technology is moving fast, new use cases are constantly emerging, and then you can help employees also make kind of informed decisions as well. So, again, like many of these things we've talked about today, easier said than done, I think. But also, frankly, there are organizations that have done this well. They have moved fast, and I do think it's a lot easier than it was, a year ago when we had this conference to be able to have just a clear, succinct policy that is hammered over the head to employees so that, if anyone's saying to you, well, I'm just nervous about whether I can use AI safely, you can say, well, that's just not a valid reason to be concerned because here are our guidelines and here are our guardrails. And so, this is how we want you to be using AI and kind of go forth and start that experimentation. So my best advice here, as you build something like this out, write it through the lens of how to encourage adoption, not just guarantee compliance. We have shared three of about 10 or 15 barriers to ROI that we see from all the work we do with hundreds of companies. We're going to close with a fourth, which is really focused on use cases. And all this has been touched on by a bunch of our speakers. Employees don't actually know how to use AI. So I'm going to start where I've started a lot of these. This is pretty typical data of a company that we work with that's had AI rolled out for at least, let's say, 4 to 6 months. This specifically is a financial services company that, again, has a relatively savvy knowledge worker population, I'd say. They have had two LLMs in their hands kind of for about 6 months. And we ask employees when we go in, we say, do you have an AI use case? And specifically, right, do you have a way that AI is significantly improving your work? And nearly half of employees in this company, and again, this is not a company that's behind. This is just kind of a typical company that we're usually starting with. Nearly half of employees say they don't have a specific AI use case. And so, from my point of view, this is what kind of your entire first 6 to 12 months of rollout is about, right? Helping employees find their personal use cases. Because as Bryce was just saying, that's the first step. They can't unlock those transformative, use cases that we all want to hear about, those big ROI, high impact use cases, if they don't understand how this brand new technology works. Again, they're the subject matter experts on your business. So we have to find those use cases. It gets worse before it gets better because when we dig into the half of employees that do report having a use case, a lot of them are usually still beginner level. So my team has looked at thousands of survey responses at this point, tens of thousands of survey responses. And these are the top 5 use cases consistently over and over we see people reporting, right? They're rewriting emails, they're finding quick fixes for code, or their Excel formulas. They're using AI like Google. They're not talking to AI like a teammate, which Eric talked about. They're summarizing documents. These are good starting points. These are quick time savings. They help people see quickly, oh, okay, this is how I might be able to work with this technology. They are critical to the adoption curve. This is not where the ROI is yet, right? It's where most people start, but it's not where we start to be able to measure impact to the business. Compare that to something like this. I just wanted to show an example here, and I know there have been a lot of great examples shared by Leo and by Eric and by Alicia and others. But when we think about what's a more intermediate or advanced level use case, still at the individual level, but still with the potential to actually unlock ROI for the company. This is the type of use case that we might see, right? So this is an employee who basically, in their words, took something that used to be done by 4 market analysts doing a market deep dive and created a workflow that got them probably 80–90% of the value of what those 4 market analysts would do in 24 hours. This is not a custom app, right? When we think about what Leo and Greg were talking about, this is not that top layer of business process automation. It's built on top of 2 LLMs the company had rolled out. But if it was scaled to hundreds of investors in this company, it could result in something where we can very clearly say, oh, that has generated ROI for the business, right? This could lead to this company has a contract with a research partner that's generating all of this market level analysis with them. So could they end that contract, right? That's the type of kind of real ROI that we start to see, but you can't find those use cases, those types of even team-wide workflows if your employees haven't seen their own personal use cases yet. So this is the journey you have to enable, right? Moving every employee from I don't have an individual use case to I have a basic personal use case. That's okay. That's the first step. But then quickly to I have an advanced individual use case. And then finally, I have something that can be implemented team wide and is actually a consistent workflow that all of us use in the same way to generate real impact. It doesn't happen overnight. We've talked a lot about patience today. I think I get, everyone feels behind. They want to see return on their investments like yesterday. But again, it takes time for employees to kind of play in the sandbox, like I talked about earlier, like Bryce, I think much more eloquently just talked about as well, right? And in most organizations, that see, there are companies that we work with where 80, 90% of their employees at least are at that basic individual use case level and on their way to that advanced and team-wide level. So your job as an AI leader, from our point of view, is to shorten that time, to shorten that adoption curve. You have to help employees find those individual use cases. First, you have to show them. So many people have talked about champions programs today. I'm not going to belabor that point, but that is the key first step. Then you need to actually hold their hand so they can find their own hyper relevant personalized use cases. A couple of people have talked about Prof AI today, which I love as the person who leads Prof AI at Section. And that's exactly what we saw as an opportunity, right? Is how do we show people those personalized use cases? And then ultimately I stole this line from a conversation I had with Bryce, very lucky for me, a couple of weeks ago. He said something where he said, your job as the leader, and he said a variation of this today, is to create the conditions for your employees to tell you the transformative use cases. And I love that. I totally agree. I think that's the journey you have to bring your employees on. And so when I think about, your job as a leader of AI, my job as a leader of AI, how do I move everyone through that adoption curve kind of faster?